Welcome back to another episode of WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. For those of you wondering, yes, that means the lights behind me are powered by the Western Journal, not electricity. My name is Brian Chai. I am the Deputy Managing Editor of Features here at the Western Journal. To my left, I have Joe Sedian. He is the Deputy Managing Editor of Story. To my right, I have reporter Andrew Shasha joining us for today. We've got a whole smorgasbord of content to get to today, so I'm going to go ahead and let Andrew kick us off.
Well, let's start that smorgasbord off with a nice, healthy meal. We're going to talk today about nationalism. We're going to talk about Brexit. So a Reuters report this week, and actually a couple of reports prior to that, have been getting at the idea that with Brexit right around the corner now, Brexit, for those who don't know, Britain is moving to leave the European Union. And so they've been working on that since early 2016. That was the first vote, was in late spring of 2016. Finally, they've kind of gotten through the bureaucratic hoops and all the electoral hoops that they needed to get Parliament on the same page and get it done. They'll be officially leaving on January 1st. Now, that means that all sorts of trade problems are going to start cropping up for them. They've been trying to kind of get those deals worked out with separate nations in the European Union, in Britain, to make sure that things like trade are not going to be kind of kneecapped throughout the next couple of years while they break away from the EU. Now, that is going to mean, apparently, for a lot of fishermen in the north of Europe, that jobs are going to be lost. It's going to be a hard season. British waters are pretty big for the catch in Europe. A lot of the production of fish there is, stemming from those waters. Belgium apparently gets, from according to Reuters, 54% of its catch in British waters. And in terms of France, we've heard numerous reports of French fishermen essentially expecting that they may have to go and find other careers. Like they're preparing to find new careers. Some say that this deal is going to be, this movement is going to be great for British sovereignty, and that it will bolster the economy because they'll be able to get the deals that they want out of the global powers in Europe. They'll be able to set their own trade deals instead of having the EU as kind of a legislating body over all the countries working those things out. Others are saying that it's going to hurt their supply lines and that it's going to devastate some EU economies, the fishing industry just being one of a lot of facets for that. So what I want to kind of get at with you guys, first of all, is I just wanted to discuss Brexit more generally. I mean, do we think that this is going to be good for the British people? Is this going to, is the sovereignty argument strong? Are we going to see benefits to this for Britain? I know that part of it was also an immigration problem for them, was that they wanted to be able to throttle immigration in the way that they felt it needed to be throttled so that they could kind of set demographic numbers and things of that nature. So, I mean, is this good for the country, or is this going to hurt everyone in Europe dramatically?
I would probably lean a little towards the latter. I don't know if it's necessarily completely, one or the other. I do think there will be some benefits. I think longer term, it's just sort of like, the European Union has always been this like a Lego set, and the pieces have been where they are, and all of a sudden you're just removing a big chunk kind of right smack dab in the middle of it. The Lego set, depending on how it's built, can still stand in that situation. But, to say that things will be exactly the same, definitely not. To say things will be better, I mean, their arguments for sovereignty, immigration, that all makes sense to me, makes complete sense to me. As far as some of the economic stumbling blocks, which, it did make me think that, they haven't necessarily been rushing into this, but it still feels rushed. It feels like some of this economic stuff, the trade stuff, should have really been hammered out better before, plowing ahead. Because, like you said, January 1st, just a few weeks away. Given that, I think there can be good of this, and I think the damage that comes from it will come from this, what appears to be poor planning. Now, obviously, I have never run a country yet, but it feels like poor planning.
Yeah, kind of going off that with poor planning. Just off the bat, why? I mean, Brexit was 4 years ago, right? Obviously, it takes time to work out, figure out what's going to happen. But didn't the fishing industries and the governments in those countries kind of know what was coming?
I mean, I think, unfortunately, the problem was, and I think this was, I guess, another one of the arguments piggybacking on Brexit over the last 4 years has been that nobody really, the political establishment hated this decision.
Right.
This was very much a kind of, it was a response to the kind of the growth of populism across the globe in the United States with the rise of Donald Trump and, in Britain as well. That kind of really throttles and kind of throws off everyone in that establishment class. They like these kind of globalist bodies. They like to kind of appear more diplomatic. They like to have those ties situated, and they would rather have kind of a more simple time governing rather than having to deal with that will of the people kind of mentality. And so I think that part of it was, and we saw this with several kind of votes having to go through over the last couple of years, the people in the UK have overwhelmingly gone back for Brexit. I mean, we saw major labor losses. What was it earlier? It was either earlier this year or late last year. I forget which. But we saw major labor losses. The people are in favor of this, but the political class is not. And I think part of it has been that the EU has kind of decided they don't want Britain to leave, and the British ruling class does not want to leave. I think they've downplayed it. They've acted as though this wasn't going to happen. This was kind of an unrealistic want of the people that wasn't going to go through. They'd change their minds when they realized what they had done and what a mess it was going to cause, and that's kind of been that bureaucratic mess that you've seen.
Okay. Now, in answer to your question, is this going to hurt or help Europe and Britain? I think whenever you're dealing with big bodies like this, whether it's globalist or not, when you're dealing with big government, and that's what the EU is, right? It's big government, top down. People in Europe, centralized government making decisions for people in the United Kingdom. And that is always not good, because the people who are best suited to govern a certain area are the people who are closest to them and who can understand what's going on. Local government, as I think conservatives or as a libertarian like myself would always say, local government is better. So in that sense, it is going to help them, because the decisions that are coming down are going to be good for the good of the UK and not for the good of the EU as a whole or for Europe as a whole. That being said, they need to be careful. I think that it's always good to be more open when it comes to trade and fishing and things like that. It's always good to be more open than closed. I don't know the in-depth details of the British and European fishing industries, but I would say that when it comes to sort of waters and stuff like that, freedom's always better. More freedom to fish, more freedom to do whatever is always better than restrictions and regulations kind of limiting that sort of stuff. So I think that this can work. This doesn't have to be detrimental as long as the leaders in the UK are interested in making it more free and taking away restrictions, regulations, all that stuff.
In which case, what I wanted to get at with you, Joe, and then I'll get to you, Brian, on the same question, is just kind of, we've seen with that rise of Trump and with the rise of populism in Europe, with Brexit, I mean, we've clearly seen that there's been a kind of a nationalist mentality behind this as well. With all of these things, the kind of reestablishment of national sovereignty over globalist power or global power and some of these larger, broader governing bodies, we've seen that, I mean, with Trump, it was the America First mentality. I mean, I personally have favored quite a bit of that rhetoric, and I like what I've seen in terms of trade from the president, so long as, things like tariffs don't continue indefinitely. I agree with you. Free trade is important. Sometimes you need to exert a little bit of power in certain areas to make better deals. I think that's an understandable way to do things. But what I want to ask you guys is, I guess, what is a nation's highest obligation in these cases? I mean, are we going to see kind of a push towards nationalism where countries are looking out for their own first, or should we be trying to be kind of one world in the way that we're dealing with these things?
It's the government's job, but the government's job isn't to, the government's job is to get out of the way as much as possible. Like Reagan said, the government is the problem, not the solution, and I'm paraphrasing. But the government's job isn't to, look over people and say, here's how we can take care of you, and then here's how we can do this and whatever. The government's job is to say, look, the best thing we can do is to take ourselves out of the equation as much as possible so that people can be empowered to make the decisions that are best for them. Globalism, I don't like globalism when it comes to governments working and other governments working to, make decisions for other people. Globalism, when it comes to free markets doing their thing and private individuals, private entities, doing commerce and trading and whatever, that's good in my opinion. As long as the government isn't telling them what to do, as long as people aren't being told, you have to do this or have this regulations or whatever. So,
and I mean, is that possible at all with, I mean, when you're in these governing bodies, certain actors are bad actors. Certain actors aren't, as Trump has said, they're not paying their fair share, or they're throttling things on the way in with tariffs in a way that we are not. We are like, if certain governments are opting in for this kind of open economy you're talking about and certain aren't, I mean, Brian, Joe, what does that mean for you? Like, do you have to be more protectionist, or should you just wait for the market to even itself out?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, I think there's a cautious way to approach trade. Like Joe said, the freest market is the best market.
right.
That being said, when you are dealing with, a country that's, known to support terrorism or something like that, like there are ways to go about trade where you're not just, paying someone to sharpen the knife that they can stab in your back. Like there are ways around that. I've always strongly disagreed that, globalism and nationalism are the only two options. Like I'm generally opposed to black versus white. That's it. That being said, I am curious. I'm genuinely curious. This isn't more of a answer as it is amusing. I'm genuinely curious to see what happens to nationalism as we move forward from. There's still lots of litigation out. But by a lot of indications, it feels like Joe Biden will be the next president. So, assuming the Trump administration is on its way out. Nationalism was such a fundamental part of that party, that rallying cry, and their base still firmly believes it. That base is still firmly entrenched in the idea of nationalism. So I'm curious to see where that goes, how that changes, if it changes, because it does feel as if, again, litigation pending. We don't know if all the 80+ million votes for Joe Biden were legit, but assuming they were, that's 80 million people saying we reject nationalism, which is that's not an insignificant number of people saying that.
Yeah, you're right. It's not, and I don't know what's going to happen with nationalism. That's going to depend a lot on what happens with where the Republican Party, decides to go from here. I think that, and this is just me, the more likely than not, you're right, Biden is going to be the president. So does the Republican Party say, look, we like what Trump's done. We think we have a winning coalition there. Are we going to stick with that? Or do they say, look, we appreciate what you've done, but we're going to go back to the more establishment, more traditionally conservative in a lot of ways, free trade and kind of not populist. It remains to be seen. I can't say one way or the other what's going to happen, because I think a lot depends on what angle the Republicans decide to take.
Yeah, Joe, it's funny. You do bring up some minor splintering within the Republican Party. I know you're bringing a topic to the table today. I think all conservatives should be able to agree on.
I think all people with consciences should be able to agree on, but unfortunately, that's just not where
there are a lot of people without consciences.
Right now. Yeah. So I'm throwing up a tweet on the screen right now, and it is from a pro-abortion activist. He appears to be an advocate for abortion policies. He appears to work in that field, and he wrote, "It is literally impossible to top our topper. #pro-abortion, #abortions, #Christmas." And basically the picture is of a Christmas tree, and it is decorated on the top. Instead of a star, it is some tools that they would use during an abortion procedure. It's disgusting. It's despicable. It's gross. It's heinous. I can think of many other adjectives that I won't go over, but it's just really the sort of thing that I think makes people who value the sanctity of life, people who value just human life in general, very angry, right? So I have two questions for y'all, and the first one is, I guess, Democrats back in the 90s and before that would talk about how they needed access to abortion, and it was going to be safe, legal, and rare. What happened to that? And do tweets like this one, which are basically the exact opposite of safe, legal, and rare, this is shout your abortion. Do tweets like this, kind of reveal the true leftist intentions when it comes to abortion on demand?
I mean, as to your first question, sorry to cut you off, Brian. This one, first of all, very basely, it makes me egregiously angry. But I think more important than anything, to answer your question about, where did that slogan go? It was just a slogan. Safe, legal, and rare was a Trojan horse when it comes to the issue of abortion. It meant nothing to these folks. I really deeply do not believe that at any point, the real genuine line in the Democratic Party was that, this is, a procedure that we don't support, but, we need to make sure that it's available to women so that there are not these back alley abortions. I mean, this, unfortunately, this very disgusting and vulgar support for just the institution of abortion, for groups like Planned Parenthood that we've seen in the last couple of years, it's an outgrowth, and it's, I guess, them showing their hand in the way that they want to handle this issue. It has always been, ever since Elizabeth Warren said it's women's reproductive rights. That's a slogan that should have gone away after she said it in the debate with Scott Brown. It should have disappeared. But that's always where this was going. It's going to start with the least permissive rhetoric possible while forwarding the agenda. And then, as Democrats often do, they work in the actual agenda, which is that they're going to be as permissive as possible with things that are absolutely abhorrent.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, I think, that this guy who posted this Twitter user, he says in a follow-up tweet, refuses to apologize, although
doubles down.
His Twitter is now private. But he said, "Some of us celebrate the right to self-determination. Y'all can stay mad about it." What?
So yeah, I'm gonna approach this from a slightly different angle. Like, obviously, what you guys have described, the actual act of abortion, like that is its own, yeah. But I think the part that for me is really disheartening. The part that really gets me down is this, people's personal lives. Like, it's one thing. We can vehemently disagree with someone if they are, pro-choice, pro-abortion, what have you.
Sure.
But for them to then, flaunt it in this manner, like when you see those videos of, a woman, woohoo, I got an abortion. Like, when you see stuff like that, it's really, at the end of the day, abortion is it should be such a private, intimate thing that... And yet you have these people just flaunting it like, they just passed their SATs or something. Like, that correlation to me is almost as disturbing as the act itself.
Yeah, I don't think people have shame. They're not,
Yeah, the lack of shame in modern society, the lack of, privacy, I guess. Like, it's just seeing those walls not just get torn down, but stay down. And it's only getting worse. Like you said, the slogan in the 90s, as empty of a platitude as it might have been, it was still sort of like this kind of private, like, we don't want to talk about too much thing, and now it's just, I'm going to put it on top of my Christmas tree. Like,
but
come on.
And I know that the people are going to always go back to, slippery slope is a fallacy. Like, logically speaking, yes, you can't determine future probability with past probability, but the fact of the matter is that every major culture war issue that the conservatives have fought in the last 3-4 decades, we have seen the Democrats take an inch and make it a mile, and then make it 10 miles. We're not talking about, and I think abortion is abhorrent, period, done, at all, in general. But we're not talking about, a first trimester abortion here where, certain establishment political figures, even on the right, are willing to kind of make leeway in terms of what should be legal, whether they agree morally or not.
Or the rape and incest exceptions.
Yes, things like that. This is the tools on top of that tree are, for lack of a better word, those are pliers that are used for a D&E second and third trimester abortion when the baby, is very clearly resembling a baby outside of the womb. They are, if you've seen the video, I forget who put it together, but a famous former abortionist put this video together of, at that point, you are ripping the limbs from the child and you are crushing the skull with those pliers. And you are then, removing the parts, piecing it together on a table to make sure that all of the parts are outside of the womb, and then you are suctioning out everything else. I mean, it's the most inhumane thing that you can possibly bear to think about. And there is absolutely no shame, like you were saying, Joe. I mean, I think, unfortunately, I don't think that there's good in shaming people for being who they are when it comes to, do you like sports or do you like playing cards? That's an issue where we shouldn't be shaming our friends.
Depends on the sports team.
Fair point. I mean, if you're not a Patriots fan, maybe a little bit of shame. Right. But I hate this mentality of there should be no shame in the culture whatsoever. It's like, listen, we shouldn't pile on and make people feel awful. Particularly, I mean, as Christians, we should be trying to love on people. But there should be an element of shame in terrible things being done, because that's how you see the light. That's how you recognize that what you've done is wrong. Mm-hmm. When there is no shame, there is never a moral recognition made. You just proceed.
I think you're right. That actually takes me to the next question I have, which is a little bit tougher. When I saw this photo, when I saw this tweet, I got mad, I got angry, and I felt a little bit of hatred toward the type of people who think that it's okay to do that. What is the correct, the loving Christian response to people like this? Not just anger and being mad at them. How do we win them over?
I think there are a couple prongs to this, because anyone who's just saying that essentially you need to ram your response down their throats and make them believe as you believe, those folks are wrong. Mm-hmm. The folks who are just saying we need to, we need to ban abortion from the United States and move on. No. I mean, we can talk about those policy implications, but there is a wide berth of things that need to be done.
Minds.
Education, hearts and minds need to be changed. You need to educate people on what this procedure is. You need to say, listen, I mean, I am someone who is an equal opportunity offender when it comes to comedy. There are things that are unacceptable in, the genuine human landscape. This isn't a joke. This is an unacceptable, to put this on top of a Christmas tree. This is clearly not a joke. This person was saying that this is awesome. This is fantastic. They doubled down. I mean, we need to educate and make people aware of what this procedure is. We need to love on people who have been victimized. And yes, we talk about the baby as the victim in this situation, and unquestionably they are the first and foremost victim. A baby, a life was killed, right. A life was ended, a heartbeat was terminated in most of these cases. We need to talk about the victims who are women. We need to talk about, how do we support these women with the grief that they feel for the rest of their lives? How do we love on them? How do we educate the rest of the population? Then we can talk about policy, because I think there are restrictions that we need to talk about in the government landscape. But we need to change hearts and minds first.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. What about you, Ryan?
I mean, maybe I'm just not as good a person as you guys, but in this case, this guy just seems like cartoonishly evil. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not sure, I know it's not Christian to assume that there's nothing that you can redeem or salvage in someone, but with someone like this, I do wonder if the appropriate response is to treat him as an example. Like, this is... we're not trying to reach out to him. We're trying to reach out to anyone who doesn't have an opinion on abortion. Like, look at this cartoonishly evil buffoon, putting this instrument, like Andrew described in graphic detail, that, dismembers babies and putting that on top of your Christmas tree and, celebrating it. Like, I just don't know if there's anything that you can redeem, save, salvage by trying to reach out to people like that. Maybe it is... maybe the important thing is to reach out to the people who don't have an opinion on abortion. That's maybe, and again, like I said, it doesn't sound very Christian, but using this idiot as an example, as this, this is not humane. That's not a great response to your question, but it is kind of like, man, there are some people I just don't know if it's even worth trying to reach across the aisle to.
I think the point is it's always worth. Everyone is, even the most lost people are still reachable. I think God can change anyone's heart.
I think there's a mixture there. I think absolutely, unquestionably, what you're saying, Joe. I mean, I think that this, any person can be convinced, any person can be reasoned, and at the end of the day, any person can be saved from kind of the nonsense that's in their heart. But at the end of the day, I do agree with you, Brian. I think that there are certain times where it is functional to also, to put something on a pedestal and say, hey, this is unacceptable. Right. Maybe that person needs shame and the other people in the middle need to recognize the evil that they're kind of getting on board with. Because I do believe that there are plenty of Democrats, not in the establishment. That establishment class, like I said, safe, legal, and rare was a Trojan horse. They were using it to make a more permissive society for abortion. People in the middle, voters, just the everyday folks who are, moderate Democrats, those Joe Biden voters that we've talked about all election cycle, the more moderate Democrats, blue dogs, those folks, some of them just aren't educated enough. So sometimes maybe pointing out these people who are, this is what
they believe.
Yeah, they're more than happy to throw, white supremacists in our face and say, this is what right-wing ideology looks like drawn out to its farthest conclusion. I don't necessarily agree that that's the farthest conclusion of conservatism. I don't think that I think that's an aberration more so than, a derivation of conservatism. But I think that it is fair to say this is an extension, the furthest logical extension of progressivism right now. This is what it looks like. This is the side that you're on. Are you on the wrong side? Time to take stock.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sadly, one state where abortion will probably always be legal is the state of California, where I had the misfortune of living for a few years. Joining abortion as far as stuff being essentially legal, or at least not prosecutable, I want to talk about today a story coming out of the new what was he? District attorney, I believe.
Yeah, the district attorney
the LA County District Attorney. A Mr. Gascon. I am blanking on his first name for some reason, but it's fine because he's kind of a doofus. So anyways, Mr. Gascon here is implementing a whole swath of procedures, kind of edicts, and I want to be careful with my wording here. Joe, please correct me.
Sure.
He is making it... He's making it a lot easier to commit crimes.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. A list of those crimes include things like trespassing, disturbing the peace, being a minor in possession of alcohol, driving without a license, driving with a suspended license, making criminal threats, drug and paraphernalia possession, being under the influence of a controlled substance, public intoxication, loitering to commit prostitution, and resisting arrest. Essentially, he's basically decided he's not going to choose to prosecute anything under that purview. Those
right.
That list of. I mean, there's more to it. There's also prosecutors will not see the death penalty, and those accused of misdemeanors and low-level felonies will actually be referred to community-based programs. Juveniles accused of misdemeanors aren't going to be prosecuted anymore. And Gascon's office will also decline to seek bail for anyone charged with a misdemeanor or nonviolent crime, and will end the use of sentencing enhancements. So it's, obviously the police unions are really upset with this, but the new DA seems to be sticking to his guns. This is what he believes in. This is what he wants to implement. He essentially wants to make crime easier, I guess, for lack of a better term. Joe, I know you got some thoughts on this.
I do.
So I'm going to kick it over to you first. Is any of this a good idea?
Yes.
What is the upside and downside?
Some of it's a good idea, and some of it is not a good idea.
Okay.
As with most things, California, in this case Los Angeles County, is taking things to the extreme. So there is something to be said from myself as a libertarian, someone who believes in criminal justice reform, for saying, look, maybe we shouldn't be throwing people in jail for low-level offenses. And I think a lot of people can get behind that, right? President Trump has been a criminal justice reformer, probably more than his predecessors. And you can say, look, you're driving with a suspended license, or you're trespassing, or something like that. That's not that's not something you deserve to go to jail for. Maybe it's something you should pay a fine for. Maybe it's something you should go to a class for. Maybe it's something that, but just throwing you in jail because society doesn't know what to do with you is not going to help anyone. It's just going to be, a drain on the taxpayers, and it's going to not help you, because if you go to jail, you're probably going to come out more of a hardened criminal. So there are, that being said, there are some of these crimes there that should not, he is essentially saying, look, you have free reign to commit some of these things, like trespassing. That one just sticks to mind. But a lot of these are,
Public
crimes,
intoxication.
Public intoxication. A lot of these are crimes. I think that's a tricky one, because with public intoxication, you can, I think it's a bad thing if you are hurting someone else, if you're bothering someone else, if you're disturbing the peace. But if you're just, being drunk in public, maybe that's not hurting anyone. Maybe you just are drunk and you're not making a scene. I don't know whether that's something that's, having an effect on other people's lives. Regardless, I think that this is bad insofar as he is saying, look, you can hurt other people. You can do crimes that affect others and we won't prosecute you. That's not good, because when you're taking away the freedom of other people, then you lose your freedom at that point, right? That being said, there are some good parts of this. Sentencing enhancements, for those of you who aren't kind of familiar with how that works, basically says, look, if you commit a bunch of low-level crimes, we can send you to jail for years. And I don't know that anyone would agree that that's the best way to stop crime, because, if I steal from a grocery store a bunch of times and I'm not violent, but I'm just swiping things off the shelves, should I really be going to jail for decades?
Yes.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to disagree with for decades. I'm going to agree. I mean, I think what you're saying is really good for I think the libertarian argument falls apart when it comes to small businesses. We're talking, if you're saying, I go into Market Basket, I go into Walmart and I swipe something, it's not hurting the business that much, financially.
Right.
Should I go to jail for however long? But, that same amount of merchandise may hurt a small business far more, especially in a year like this with COVID. I want to say that I think, I believe in criminal justice reform. I'm not a libertarian. I'm a traditional conservative, but I definitely have some mild libertarian leanings, and I'm definitely a constitutionalist. I think that there is room for criminal justice reform. I don't think that this is it. I think that this is some decent ideas in terrible practice. I mean, I very much oppose the death penalty personally.
Me too.
We just talked about the death penalty for babies. I don't believe in it for criminals either. I don't think taking a life is ever a solution. And I've
Pro-life
supported
from womb to tomb.
Yeah, I've supported decriminalization of certain possession charges, things like that. I mean, I'm in support of those things with you, Joe. But this is terrible practice. This is not how law is made. You know what I mean? I think that you're the district attorney. You don't make law. You prosecute law. And yes, there is when there's an abundance of cases on your desk, sometimes you got to make choices. You got to get plea deals in certain cases. You got to drop certain charges, and you got to pursue the ones that matter the most. I don't think these are the ones that matter the most, but I think dropping a blanket statement saying that we're not going to prosecute any of these is absolutely terrible. I agree with you, Brian, that it almost encourages crime, but beyond that, it is taking discretion and making it legislation. It's me deciding that I don't like the law that passed. I'm going to use my discretion to override it completely, and that's ridiculous.
When it comes to discretion, though, what about I guess if let's say you commit a low-level offense, should whether you go to jail or not be dependent on how much stuff the DA had to do? Like how much other things were on the DA's
No,
desk?
it absolutely shouldn't, and that's why I'm saying there are other avenues for reform than just dropping a blanket statement and saying, I'm not going to prosecute any of these things.
Like what?
What do you mean, like what? I mean, we can talk about sentencing enhancements. We can talk about, dropping we can talk about dropping charges for, on good behavior. We can talk about things like, maybe you should go to a class. Maybe you should go to a halfway house. Maybe you should do X, X, and X. But we can't talk about, as a department, saying, I'm just not going to prosecute any of these crimes. Have a day. Like, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense.
And I agree. Remember, I agree with you on many of these things. I think it's a bad idea not to prosecute. I think it's a bad idea just to say you have free reign to commit crimes. I think there are some good nuggets here, like the possession of nonviolent possession of drugs. Mm-hmm. I don't think that should be punished, and even if it is punished, I don't think you should go to jail for that.
I agree, but those are things that the legislature needs to deal with, and the legislatures across America are starting to deal with these. Donald Trump dealt with this with some of his reform, and then we're seeing states across the country talk about decriminalization of marijuana. We're seeing maybe a slow crawl. It may be not as fast as you want.
Yeah.
I agree, but we can't talk about departments just making law. That's something that as a libertarian you should hate.
No, I think
when it comes to bureaucrats making law.
I think that's a valid point. One thing I will say on that with cash bail, and this is probably a conversation we can have for another day because we can go on and on and on about it. But I do like that cash bail he's basically abolished that, because I think that if you are accused of a crime and bail is before you are convicted, it is when you are still accused, so you're innocent until proven guilty. It basically differentiates whether you'll go to jail or not based on how much money you have. So $500 to someone with a good paying job and some savings in the bank is not very much money. $500 to someone who's living paycheck to paycheck means you might go to jail. So
I think those are things that can be discussed
Yeah.
as incremental.
Okay, and that's fair. That's a valid point. You're not saying we should get rid of all. You're not saying not all of these things are bad in and of themselves, but maybe the process isn't quite what we like. And I tend to agree with you that California's taking things to extremes as they always do. So
Yep. All right. And with that, guys, before we encourage any more people in LA to go commit crimes, I'm going to remind you once again that this is WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. You can catch us every day, Monday through Friday, at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. If you're listening us to or via audio, you can do us a huge favor by going to youtube.com/WJ Live. Click the subscribe button, and when prompted, hit the bell.
ding.
That way you'll be notified every time a new podcast goes live. If you are watching us already on YouTube, you can do us another solid by going to your favorite audio podcast network, whether it's Apple, Spotify, what have you. And you can listen to WJ Live there. Please subscribe to us. And if you could do us another huge favor, leave us a 5-star review. That'd be much, much appreciated. And if you've already done all those things, there's one more thing you can do to help us out. Please go to westernjournal.com/join, and you can actually subscribe to our content directly. That would be a major help for us and help combat any potential roadblocks in getting our content to you, whether it's big tech bias or one of the many other sites that you may be going to. That would be much appreciated. Thank you so much for watching us today. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
The Western Journal has rolled out a brand new subscription model designed specifically for readers like you, who want the unvarnished truth that the establishment media won't tell you. Our multi-tiered plans give you exactly what you want and help us fight fake news during this, the most important election of our lives. Become a subscriber to the Western Journal today and unlock exclusive features you won't find anywhere else. It's easy. Just follow the prompts in this video to join us in equipping readers with the truth.